Y'all, I am mind blown by the suspect in the Brian Thompson case. Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky, and I am blown away by this suspect who's been charged with the death of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. I'm sure a lot of us were thinking there's no way that whoever committed this crime would just be leaving clues for investigators to basically guarantee his capture. Nobody could be that clueless. He must be playing games with investigators, right? Nope. If this young man, Luigi Mangiani, is the individual who took CEO Brian Thompson's life, then he has to be the worst criminal ever. You would think that he would know that this is a high-profile crime. Brian Thompson was the CEO of a very powerful insurance corporation, and he was rich. So they were going to be bringing out all of the agencies, and it was going to get a ton of media exposure. I mean, his face is plastered all over every channel in the country. He's a person of interest in a very high-profile death, and he's eating at McDonald's. If Mangiani is the individual who committed this crime, and I say if because we don't know all of the details yet, then he arrived in New York 10 days before he planned on committing this crime, making sure that he was in front of every camera in the city. Then he goes and stays at a hostel where he's surrounded by people who could definitely identify him if they need to. Then he goes and buys a couple of drinks and some protein bars in front of cameras right before he commits the crime. Then it would appear that he just guesses when Brian Thompson is going to be walking out of his hotel without security, where he walks up behind him on the sidewalk and takes his life. Now, I do believe that this suspect did have some sort of instruction or firearms training. He definitely knows how to handle his firearm, and he knew how to clear those jams very quickly. His form was good, and it definitely wasn't his first time handling a firearm. Maybe he trained for that very moment. He was very calm as he was in the act of taking Brian Thompson's life. Now, it appears that he left the shell casings at the crime scene on purpose because he had written messages on them in Sharpie. Then, after he takes Brian Thompson's life, he runs down an alley, and of course, he drops his cell phone. Then he jumps on a bicycle and pedals his way to Central Park, where he leaves his backpack. Inside this backpack, there's a jacket and some Monopoly money. Now, it's been reported that the Monopoly money was because he was going to throw this on Brian Thompson after he took his life. Now, I don't know that to be fact. That's just what's being reported. So he leaves the backpack and the money and the jacket in Central Park. So there's a good chance that after he gets to Central Park, he takes off the jacket that he's seen wearing when he's firing at Brian Thompson and switches to the black jacket that we see him wearing when he's getting into the cab. So of course we're all thinking, who would just leave clues laying around for investigators? He must be leading them on a wild goose chase, right? This must be methodical. It must be all part of his plan. But that's not the case. Because after he goes to Central Park and drops off his stuff and leaves it right out in the open for law enforcement to find, he hops in a cab. When he hops in the cab, he looks directly into the camera. I guess maybe he did that to make sure that they could track his whereabouts. Then he takes 2 cabs to the bus station and takes a bus out of New York. His face is on screens all over the country. So what would be the best thing to do if you were trying to elude law enforcement and avoid a nationwide manhunt? Well, go eat at McDonald's. He's eating at McDonald's. His face is plastered all over the country. And who wouldn't recognize these eyebrows? So an employee at McDonald's recognizes this individual and calls law enforcement. It's just so odd. He had to have known that there were multiple law enforcement agencies looking for him. They had put his face out there for everyone to see, but yet he's eating at McDonald's. When he's approached by law enforcement at the McDonald's, he hands them a fake ID. Really? A fake ID? Did he not think that law enforcement was going to run this ID? It just doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. And then, just when you think it can't get any worse, he's carrying a ghost gun with a suppressor. You can't make this stuff up. For anyone who's not familiar with what a ghost firearm is, I'll give you a few examples. So, any time that a serial number is either scraped or buffed off of a firearm, then that firearm loses its identity. It becomes a ghost firearm. A lot of firearms are made with the lower portion being made out of polymer, which is a really durable plastic. So it's not uncommon for people to print a lower to a firearm on a 3D printer. There's also 80% lowers, which can be purchased online. And basically what that is the lower part of a firearm that is only 80% finished. So it's up to the buyer to finish the last 20%. Now, because only 80% of the firearm is finished, by law, it's not considered a firearm. It can be purchased without a background check, and it doesn't have a serial number. So these are all examples of ghost firearms. Now, once you have the lower, you can purchase all of the other parts to complete this firearm online without a background check, and none of this stuff has serial numbers on it. So basically, a ghost firearm is untraceable. The suppressor that he also had with the firearm was likely illegal. It was either homemade or it was stolen. Because you can't just go to the store and buy a suppressor for your firearm. You need what's called a tax stamp, and there's also a waiting time. So in order to buy a suppressor, you have to do a background check, and there's a lot of paperwork involved. A lot of states don't even allow someone to own a suppressor. So it's likely that this suppressor was illegal as well. So there's a nationwide manhunt going on for this suspect. It seems as though he would know this. It seems as though he would watch the news. We know that he was online. So it seems as though he would know that there's multiple agencies looking for him. 5 days after he commits the crime, and different states than where he committed the crime, and this suspect is still carrying around the weapon. Does that make any sense whatsoever? Why would he still be carrying around the weapon? It might be possible that he had other things planned with this weapon, but it just doesn't make sense that he would still be carrying this around. It just doesn't make sense that he would still have the fake ID, and it makes even less sense that he would still have a weapon that he used to take someone's life. Not just the firearm, but the suppressor as well. He should have dumped all of these items. It doesn't make sense that he's still walking around with these things. I mean, he had to have known that eventually someone was going to recognize him. If he only had the ID, then that might be a little bit different. If he only had the ID and the firearm, that might be a little bit different. But when you have the ID, the firearm, and the suppressor, that's not a good look. You might as well have just turned yourself in. I mean, you're walking around with all of the evidence that law enforcement is looking for. Someone would have to be pretty clueless to know that there's a nationwide manhunt going on for them. You know, there's a lot of different agencies looking for him, and he knows this, but he's still carrying around the weapon. He's still carrying around all of the evidence that law enforcement is looking for. That's not a good look for him. Now, I know that, we can't really say that he's guilty because he hasn't been found guilty yet. But when you're cruising around with the ID and the firearm and the suppressor, that's not good. Now that they have the firearm, law enforcement is going to have an easy time matching this firearm up to the ammunition that they found at the crime scene, if this is the firearm that was used. It wouldn't even surprise me, after all of these mistakes that he made, it wouldn't even surprise me if he had the same ammunition in the firearm when they caught him that he was using at the crime scene. It seems like anyone would know better than that. But this guy basically made every mistake that you could possibly make. He made so many mistakes that a lot of us began to think that he was playing games with investigators. Because who could make this many mistakes? Someone who just happened to be in the right place at the right time when Brian Thompson walked out of his hotel room. He was there when Brian Thompson walked out. So how would he know that Brian Thompson was leaving his hotel room at exactly that time? He also demonstrated that he was proficient with a firearm. And then he escaped. He was gone. He was already out of New York. So how could this individual make so many mistakes without it being intentional? But now we know it wasn't intentional. He really was that clueless. He really was leaving clues for investigators. He basically led law enforcement right to himself. If the firearm is a match and he was carrying around this firearm, then that's pretty hard to deny. That's pretty solid proof. Maybe this guy had a claim that was denied by UnitedHealthcare. Maybe he was an investor. Maybe he was, as they say, a revolutionary. Maybe he was, anti-corporation, anti-capitalism. This was a high-profile crime. So he had to have known that a lot of people were going to be looking for him. He had to have known this was a powerful person in the corporate world. This was somebody who had a lot of money. So he had to know that there were going to be multiple agencies looking for him. He had to have known that there was going to be multiple agencies picking through every piece of evidence that he left behind. Now, I don't know if you and I would get the same treatment, but he had to have known that this was a high-profile target, and he was still so careless. So there's going to be a lot of information that comes out about this, and I still have a lot of questions. I want to know why, who, and how could someone be so careless and clueless about this crime? It just doesn't make sense to me. But there's going to be a lot more information coming out about this crime as well as about this suspect. And I'm definitely going to be staying on top of that. And I'll be coming on here to give you all updates. So thanks for hanging out with me today. I really do appreciate it. And if you liked my video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. I hope that y'all had a great day, and we'll see you next time.